When a ruthless billionaire laughed at his victims in court, he didn't know his closest ally was about to betray him. The New York federal courthouse was buzzing with tense energy that autumn morning. Reporters jostled through marble corridors, their cameras ready like weapons pointed at the main entrance. News of billionaire Richard Lawson's arrival, CEO of Lawson Investments, had spread like wildfire. The man who built a $4.2 billion empire was about to face justice, and no one wanted to miss the spectacle that was about to unfold. Richard Lawson walked through the courthouse doors as if he were entering one of his five-star restaurants. His $10,000 Armani suit seemed to shine under the fluorescent lights, and his disdainful smile revealed perfectly whitened teeth. Adjusting his Italian silk tie with fingers covered in gold rings, he deliberately ignored the furious glares from dozens of victims who packed the courtroom benches. To him, they were mere pawns in his financial chess game, disposable pieces in his rise to the top. When Judge Angela Carter entered the room, everyone stood. Everyone except Lawson. With a mocking smile playing on his thin lips, he remained seated, his legs crossed casually, as if he were in his penthouse office. "Please be seated, Your Honor," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, provoking indignant whispers throughout the room. Judge Carter, known for her unwavering integrity, maintained her composure, her dark eyes fixed on the man who dared to challenge her court's authority. The most shocking moment of the morning, however, came when an elderly lady began sobbing silently in the front row. Martha Stevens, 78, had lost all her savings in Lawson's scheme. As her tears fell, Lawson turned to his lawyer and said, loud enough for everyone around to hear, "Someone should tell Grandma she should have invested in a nursing home instead of my stocks." The cruel comment provoked gasps of horror throughout the room, but Lawson just smiled, apparently satisfied with the impact of his words. In a final gesture of supreme disrespect, Lawson pulled a gold Mont Blanc pen from his suit's inner pocket. With a theatrical flourish, he extended it toward Judge Carter. "Perhaps you need a more expensive pen to sign my acquittal, Your Honor," he said, his tone dripping with venom disguised as honey. Judge Carter merely looked at the pen and then at Lawson, her eyes conveying a clear message. His arrogance would be his own downfall. But while Lawson's arrogance echoed through the courthouse corridors that morning, no one could imagine how his next act of cruelty would trigger a series of events that no money in the world could prevent. The second day of trial began with a line of witnesses stretching down the courthouse corridor. Among them was James Cooper, a retired math teacher who had invested his life savings, 47 years of savings, in Lawson's fund. As James approached the witness stand, his hands trembling while holding a worn folder containing his last correspondence with Lawson Investments, the defendant pulled out his latest iPhone model and began playing Candy Crush, the sound of bursting candies echoing obscenely through the silent room. Margaret, a 52-year-old nurse, was next to take the stand. Her choked voice could barely contain tears as she described how she lost the house where she raised her 3 children, a modest residence in Queens that her family had called home for 4 decades. "My husband passed away last year," she sobbed, "and now I don't even have a place to keep his memories." Lawson, without raising his eyes from his phone, muttered loud enough for the front row to hear, "Memories don't pay my bills, darling." The testimony that made even the court security guards wipe their eyes came from Thomas Wright, a single father whose 8-year-old son was fighting leukemia. With a trembling voice, he explained how he had invested the treatment money with Lawson, after promises of returns that would allow payment for an experimental procedure. "My son," he paused, swallowing hard. "My little David didn't make it through the wait." At this moment, Lawson finally raised his eyes from his phone, only to let out a loud yawn and comment, "I'm not a doctor, not my problem." The entire courtroom froze when Robert Martinez, a former security guard at Lawson Investments, described the luxurious parties Lawson would throw each time a new group of investors fell for his scheme. "He would open $5,000 bottles of champagne," Martinez testified, "and toast to the stupidity of dreamers." As the former security guard spoke, Lawson smiled, apparently reliving the memories with satisfaction. His only reaction was to pull out a silk handkerchief from his pocket and pretend to wipe invisible tears of false remorse. Tension reached its peak when Sarah Morrison, a 68-year-old widow, tried to approach Lawson during a trial break. "Please," she begged. "That money was for my grandchildren's college." Lawson, adjusting his Italian silk tie, responded with an icy smile. "Maybe they should try scholarships. I heard the community is always looking for charity cases." His lawyers quickly pulled him away, but the damage was done. The look of pure contempt on his face would be etched in everyone's memory. The court had witnessed only the surface of Lawson's cruelty, but in the vaults of Lawson Investments, hidden documents contained even darker truths that would make the stories of that day seem like just the beginning. The third day of trial began with the prosecution presenting a series of internal documents from Lawson Investments. While prosecutor Rachel Davidson displayed the first emails on the courtroom screen, Lawson continued with his arrogant posture, picking at his cuticles with a gold toothpick. "Mr. Lawson," Judge Carter's strong voice cut through the air, "if you don't show proper respect for this court, I'll be happy to arrange a cell where you can tend to your manicure in complete privacy." A deathly silence fell over the room when the first email appeared on screen. "Another flock of sheep ready for shearing," Lawson had written to his executive team. "These teachers and nurses are so predictable. Wave a golden retirement in front of them and they practically beg to give us their money." As the email was read, Lawson let out a mocking laugh, but one stern look from Judge Carter made him swallow hard and shift uncomfortably in his chair. The revelations became even more shocking when an audio recording was played. It was Lawson's voice in a board meeting. "Who cares about their retirement funds? My new yacht won't pay for itself." When he tried to interrupt the recording with a sarcastic comment, Judge Carter slammed her gavel hard. "Mr. Lawson, one more word out of turn, and you will be removed from this room. Your arrogance may impress at your cocktail parties, but here it only demonstrates how much you need a lesson in humility." The following documents revealed a systematic pattern of fraud. Detailed spreadsheets showed how Lawson diverted investors' money directly into personal accounts in tax havens. In a particularly revealing message exchange, he bragged to a colleague, "These idiots trust us so much we could sell them the Brooklyn Bridge." This time, before he could make any comment, Lawson met Judge Carter's firm gaze and, for the first time since the trial began, remained silent. The most impactful moment came when the prosecution presented a video from Lawson's New Year's party on his $300 million yacht. In the footage, he raised a crystal glass and toasted, "To our dear investors who keep believing in the fairy tale we sell them." When he tried to justify the video as just a joke between friends, Judge Carter interrupted him. "Mr. Lawson, you may think your actions are a joke, but I assure you your next residence will have much less luxurious decorations." As documents continued revealing Lawson's empire of lies, a familiar shadow moved in the back of the courtroom. Soon, everyone would discover that the emails and recordings were just the tip of a much deeper and darker iceberg. A murmur ran through the courtroom when Sarah Chen entered. The former CFO of Lawson Investments walked with firm steps, her elegant posture contrasting with the visible tension in her face. Lawson's reaction was instantaneous. His arrogant smile faltered for the first time since the trial began. For a fleeting moment, fear crossed his eyes, quickly replaced by a mask of disdain. "Ah, if it isn't my dear Sarah," he mocked, but was silenced by a cutting look from Judge Carter. Sarah sat at the witness stand, adjusting her impeccable navy blazer. Her gaze briefly crossed with Lawson's before turning to the prosecutor. "Mr. Lawson wasn't just my boss," she began, her clear and firm voice echoing through the room. "For 3 years, I was his confidant, his lover, and witness to every scheme he orchestrated." The entire courtroom held its breath. Lawson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while his lawyers exchanged worried looks. Judge Carter watched attentively, her eyes alternating between Sarah and the defendant. With surgical precision, Sarah began exposing the scheme's sordid details. She presented emails that Lawson had deleted, but she had secretly preserved. After each new investment, she revealed, he would open a $5,000 bottle of Krug Clos d'Ambonnet champagne and toast to infinite human stupidity. As she spoke, she projected photos of these celebrations, showing Lawson in his private office, laughing, while monitors in the background displayed accounts being emptied. The most devastating moment came when Sarah played an audio recording. It was Lawson, drunk after a party, planning his escape. "When everything falls apart, I'll take the jet to the Maldives. As for Sarah and the others, to hell with them. Loyalty is for the weak." Silent tears ran down Sarah's face as the recording played. Lawson, for the first time, seemed truly shaken, his normally flushed face now pale as paper. Judge Carter observed everything with a grave expression, her hands firmly interlaced on the desk. The defense lawyers desperately tried to discredit Sarah's testimony, but she was prepared. For every accusation of lying or manipulation, she presented more evidence: bank transfers, text messages, recordings of secret meetings. "I kept everything," she declared, her voice trembling slightly, "because I knew one day I would have to choose between my conscience and my safety." Lawson, now visibly disturbed, whispered frantically with his lawyers, his veneer of confidence finally beginning to crack. Sarah's testimony had shaken the foundations of Lawson's empire, but the real earthquake was yet to come. In the depths of her evidence folder, a document waited. A document so explosive that it would make that day's testimony seem like just a prelude to the true devastation. Tension in the courtroom reached its peak when Sarah Chen opened a black folder and extracted a set of sealed documents. Lawson's face, already pale from the previous testimony, completely lost its color when he recognized the embossed golden letterhead. It was the same one he used in his ultra-secret correspondence. His fingers, previously steady while adjusting his silk tie, now visibly trembled. Judge Carter leaned forward in her chair, her attentive eyes fixed on the papers that promised to reveal even more about the crumbling empire. "These documents," Sarah began, her voice echoing through the silent room, "prove that Mr. Lawson not only stole from private investors, but also diverted funds from charitable institutions." She projected onto the screen a series of bank transfers showing millions being diverted from children's cancer foundations, homeless shelters, and literacy programs. Lawson, in a last effort to maintain his facade, tried to stand a protest, but Judge Carter silenced him with a cutting look. "Mr. Lawson, you have shown enough contempt for this court. One more word and you will be removed from the room." The most devastating blow came when Sarah played a recording of a conversation between Lawson and his original lawyers, who had resigned from the case weeks before. In the recording, Lawson boasted about how he had deceived a widow of a firefighter killed on 9/11, while simultaneously transferring her funds to an account in the Cayman Islands. She kept crying about how it was her husband's life insurance money. His drunken voice mocked in the audio, "But hey, someone needs to finance my new Ferrari collection." In a moment of absolute desperation, Lawson did something that shocked even his own lawyers. Rising abruptly, he pulled a check from his Armani suit and extended it toward Judge Carter. "Your Honor," his voice now trembled, losing all previous arrogance, "perhaps we can resolve this in a more civilized way? Say, a generous donation to the judicial system?" The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Carter rose slowly, her gaze fixed on Lawson with an intensity that made the billionaire physically recoil. "Mr. Lawson," her voice was pure ice, "you just attempted to bribe this court in full session. Officers, escort the defendant to a cell. His bail is revoked." As Lawson was removed from the room, his facade of power and control visibly crumbled. His $10,000 suit now looked wrinkled and out of place, his silk tie crooked, his perfectly styled hair disheveled. By the time the officers reached him, he still tried one last play. "You can't treat me like this. I'm Richard Lawson. I own half of Manhattan." Judge Carter, unfazed, responded, "Correction, Mr. Lawson. You owned." As officers escorted the once powerful CEO out of the courtroom, no one could predict that the worst moment of Richard Lawson's life was yet to come, a revelation so devastating that it would make his empire seem like a sandcastle before the tide. The next morning began with a twist that no one expected. Sarah Chen returned to court, carrying an external hard drive that contained years of secret recordings from Lawson's office security cameras. On the courtroom's giant screen, high-definition images showed the CEO in his most cruel and unguarded moments. The first recording showed Lawson laughing while watching TV news about a nursing home that had to close after losing its savings in his scheme. "More space on the streets for my new real estate complex," he toasted, with champagne. Lawson's defense lawyers, now visibly uncomfortable, began discreetly gathering their papers. The lead attorney, Harrison Wells, rose reluctantly. "Your Honor, I request a recess for conference with my client." Judge Carter, however, was inflexible. "Mr. Wells, your client has already abused this court's patience sufficiently. The evidence will continue to be presented." Lawson, now wearing a wrinkled suit from the day before, seemed to shrink in his chair. His previous arrogance completely evaporated. The prosecution then presented phone recordings revealing how Lawson planned to expatriate billions to secret accounts while his victims begged for their money back. In a particularly disturbing call, he instructed his employees to leave that retired teacher crying on the line, while discussing the purchase of his 6th Hamptons mansion. Judge Carter, who had maintained her composure throughout the trial, couldn't contain a look of absolute disgust directed at the defendant. The moment that definitively sealed Lawson's fate came when Sarah presented documents proving he had diverted funds even from a foundation that helped terminally ill children. The evidence showed million-dollar transfers being made on the same day the foundation had to refuse treatment to dozens of children due to lack of resources. When Lawson tried to stammer an explanation, Judge Carter interrupted him. "Mr. Lawson, I suggest you save your breath. You'll need it to explain your actions to your new cellmate." The prosecution's final card was a detailed presentation showing how every stolen penny had been spent. Yachts, mansions, sports cars, extravagant parties, where champagne literally flowed from crystal fountains. As the images passed on screen, Sarah narrated the values. $2 million in rare wines, $15 million in watches, $50 million in art, all bought with money from retirees, widows, and charities. The entire courtroom watched in shocked silence, while Lawson, the man who once considered himself untouchable, sank deeper into his chair. As the last pieces of evidence were presented, a terrifying truth began to emerge. Richard Lawson's empire wasn't just a fraudulent scheme, it was a monument to human cruelty. And the worst was yet to come. The penultimate day of the trial began with a dramatic change in Lawson's behavior. The man who previously displayed arrogant smiles now seemed to have aged a decade in just a few days. His Armani suit, worn for the 3rd consecutive time, was wrinkled and stained with sweat. His hands, once steady holding his Mont Blanc pen, now trembled uncontrollably as he scribbled frantic notes to his remaining lawyers, who maintained a calculated distance from their disgraced client. The prosecution presented their final witness, a former butler of Lawson's. With a calm and precise voice, he described a private party where Lawson, drunk on power and champagne, revealed his true character. Mr. Lawson gathered his closest guests and proposed a toast. "To the beauty of greed," he said, "and to the idiots who make us rich." At this moment, Lawson exploded in uncontrolled fury, rising abruptly. "Lies! They're all liars!" he shouted, his face red with rage. Judge Carter slammed her gavel hard. "Mr. Lawson, this is your final warning." It was then that Lawson committed his most desperate act. In a moment of pure insanity, he stood up and began shouting increasingly larger numbers. 10 million, 20 million, 50 million, I can transfer it right now." The entire courtroom froze in absolute shock, watching the man who had already tried to bribe the judge once now completely out of control. Judge Carter, with glacial calm, looked directly into Lawson's eyes and declared, "Mr. Lawson, your pathetic attempts to buy justice only prove that you still haven't understood anything. Officers, remove the defendant from the room." As 2 court officers approached, something inside Lawson seemed to break completely. The man who once commanded a financial empire now thrashed like a child having a tantrum. "You can't touch me!" he screamed as he was dragged toward the door. "I know governors, senators. You don't know who I am?" His Italian silk tie, once impeccable, now hung crookedly from his neck like a defeated flag. Judge Carter watched the scene with a mixture of disgust and contained satisfaction, while the entire courtroom watched in silence the final fall of the powerful Richard Lawson. The most surreal moment came when Lawson, already near the door, turned one last time to face the room. His face, once a mask of arrogance, was now contorted in an expression of pure desperation. Tears ran down his cheeks, staining his designer shirt. "Please," he begged, his voice breaking. I can pay anything." Judge Carter, rising from her chair, pronounced the words that would seal his fate. "Mr. Lawson, there are things your money can't buy. Justice is one of them." As Lawson was escorted out of the courtroom, no one imagined that the real moment of reckoning was still to come. In less than 24 hours, the final sentence would not only end an era on Wall Street, but would rewrite the very definition of financial justice. The last day of the trial attracted such a large crowd that the line stretched for 3 blocks. Inside the courthouse, the silence was almost palpable as Richard Lawson entered, escorted by 2 officers. His suit, once a symbol of power, now looked like an ill-fitting costume. His eyes, which before showed only disdain, now revealed something new: fear. Judge Carter, seated at her bench with the same ordinary pen she had used throughout the trial, prepared to deliver the sentence that would end one of the most notorious cases in Wall Street history. "Richard Lawson," Judge Carter's voice resonated through the room. "After considering all the evidence presented, the victims' testimonies, and your own actions in this court, the time has come for your sentence." She paused, her eyes scanning the packed room, where dozens of victims awaited the final verdict. Sarah Chen, seated in the front row, remained upright, her face a mask of determination. On the other side, the few lawyers still representing Lawson seemed already resigned to the inevitable. The judge continued, her voice carrying the weight of justice. "You not only stole these people's money, you stole their dreams, their hopes, their dignity. Your arrogance and cruelty during this trial only confirmed that you possess not 1 ounce of remorse." Lawson, who once mocked the court's authority, now visibly trembled. Judge Carter picked up her ordinary pen, the same one he had mocked on the first day, and began signing the official sentencing documents. "This court sentences you, Richard Lawson, to 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole," declared Judge Carter. "Additionally, I order the restitution of $4.2 billion to your victims and the forfeiture of all your assets." When the officers approached to handcuff him, Lawson finally broke. His legs gave way and he fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. The man who once considered himself above the law now begged for mercy, but his pleas echoed empty in the room that had witnessed his cruelty. As Lawson was led out of the courtroom, now officially a convicted criminal, Judge Carter made one final statement. "Let this case serve as an example. In my court, it doesn't matter how many billions you have or how many mansions you own. Justice is not for sale." Outside, a crowd of victims celebrated, while reporters rushed to broadcast the news. Sarah Chen, watching her former boss being led to prison, allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Justice, even if slow, had finally arrived, and Judge Carter's ordinary pen had proved more powerful than all of Richard Lawson's gold pens. On that historic day, Wall Street learned a valuable lesson. Empires built on lies eventually crumble, and all the money in the world can't buy a happy ending for those who choose the path of greed and cruelty.